Welcome to the FYI on Youth Ministry, a youth ministry podcast from the Fuller Youth Institute. This season is all about the 7 transitions of young adulthood. And in today's episode, we're talking about the self-caring transition. I'm your host, Roslyn Hernandez, and the young adults that we're going to hear from today are Amalia, Christian, Laura, Faith, and Raechel. But first, here is Steve with an overview of the self-caring transition.
All right, so this season we're talking about young adults and transitions, and we want to talk about the self-caring transition. This is how I'm caring for myself as I think about my well-being. And this well-being has 2 parts. One is the physical well-being, but then there's also the mental well-being. You have physical health and mental health. And oftentimes growing up, this care is shared by an adult or a legal guardian that is caring for and supporting and being responsible for the mental and physical health of their children or their young people. But as a young adult really moves into their 20s, they have to take on that responsibility for themselves, to think about what it means to physically care for themselves through exercise, through getting physicals, through thinking about the ways that they are taking care of their physical bodies. And then there's also the mental health, which is really, really important to young adults, but there's oftentimes a need for them to take action to ensure that they're getting the support that they need. This becomes really important for them, especially not just with episodic mental health or physical health topics, but oftentimes they have childhood challenges, physically or mentally, that has been shared and owned by the caring adults in their lives that now they have to own for themselves. And so there's an element of care, there's an element of responsibility, there's an element even of almost grief that comes with having to hold the reality of this for themselves. So this becomes a really, really important topic that young adults are very, very interested in and need to talk about. What is their physical well-being? What is their mental health? And how do they own that for themselves?
As we just heard, the self-caring transition is about young adults taking ownership of their well-being. This means that they're becoming more responsible of their own health, and whether it's their physical health or their mental health, young adults are learning to be more aware and to take responsibility for their diagnoses. Here's Laura's reflection on navigating mental health diagnoses.
The first that comes to my mind is the responsibility of taking care of my mental health. Mental health has had a really prominent theme throughout young adulthood for me. I was diagnosed with depression a month before I started college. And then 6 months after graduating college, I got diagnosed with ADHD, and about 6 months ago, I got diagnosed with anxiety. So it's been a lot of different navigating diagnoses and taking on the responsibility of what it means to take care of myself. And then stepping into that when I meet with my psychiatrist to talk about my medications, I have to take the responsibility of knowing what is actually working. Am I actually noticing side effects? Because it's so easy for me to just take my medication and not critically think through how is this impacting me. And so I'm still not perfect at that, but making sure that I am doing things that are going to be caring for my mental health has been really key to know that that's going to impact the rest of my transitions if I am not careful with it.
While young adults are becoming more responsible for their well-being as individuals, they're also learning about the importance of community and social support. Here's what Amalia learned about the role of community and how she cultivated community for herself.
One of the biggest things about self-caring and the transition that I learned was how to be interdependent. I think especially as a Black African American woman, we're taught this strong Black woman narrative, this thing of, I can do it on my own, I don't need nobody to help me. But being thrown out into the world during a pandemic where suddenly I wasn't around a community, I wasn't around my family, I realized quite quickly that in order to care for myself, I actually did need that community and that family that I had taken for granted beforehand. And so for me, self-caring really meant pursuing different relationships that I wouldn't have looked like previously, whether that be romantic, whether that be friendships, whether that means finding a new family. And it came in a lot of different weird ways that I wasn't expecting because I really didn't know how to make friends prior to that point. But for me, self-care meant looking for friendships, looking for community, looking for relationships, in order to understand that I can't do this on my own, but I need a support team to back me up.
Many times, the need for community and self growth or even self management can go hand in hand. Young adults may learn about what they need and the many ways in which they can help themselves through a process of exploring and experimenting. Here's what Laura learned about personal self care practices after a time when she did not have the social support that she had developed in college.
After college, that time was a really disorienting time because I went from this really large community in this close, like, Christian university to having my friends spread around the country. And so I found that it was difficult for me to almost, yeah, self-soothe. I know that that's usually termed for babies, but like to, like, be able to, like, calm myself down or care for myself. And so I just started to, like, keep a journal of, like, what are the healthy habits that I did that day. I went on a walk, or I called a friend, or I didn't beat myself up for going out to lunch with someone. And that was really helpful to keep a list of those things, like, daily, to kind of remind myself that I am taking care of myself, even when I wanted to get really, like, frustrated with myself or angry or compare how my self-care with someone else.
Young adults get incredible benefits from learning about personal practices that work for them, but they have also found that building community around self care has a variety of other benefits. Let's hear what Will and Christian shared about the multiple benefits of a self care community.
I think one of the things that has stuck out to me is I found that my self-care can really go down the toilet quite quickly unless I keep tabs on it. And I find that something that's really important for me is getting outside in the morning, working out, being active outside with friends. I found to be something that's crucial because I'm quite a social person, and getting outside with friends has been a habit that has one that's been really formational for me, in the sense that I try to do that with friends who share different beliefs than I. I really try to do activities outside of my Christian bubble with those who would think quite differently from me, or I'd be on very different pages with certain types of issues. And I found that conversations around an activity, don't know if that's a male thing, don't want to stereotype, but I find that conversations around kind of other activities can be really helpful for me in figuring out, okay, what do I believe? All right, I've just graduated university. How do I want to spend my money? How do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to date? Things like that I found to be really helpful. And then being challenged after being listened to, I found to be really constructive.
Yeah, I've, similar to Will, had a good experience of having kind of like a community built around some of those self-care things. So for me, it's like group fitness classes, which if you would have asked me at 22, I would have said, like, there's no way I would ever get into that. But having, like, a group of people that's not necessarily connected to my church, not necessarily connected to my work, it's separate. And the thing that bonds us is this group activity, and being able to invite people from other contexts into that, but also just having this community built around the thing that is caring for myself, because it has this, like, multiplication factor of it's caring for myself socially and mentally and physically, and it's all like wrapped up into this one like powerhouse hour or whatever the case may be. So like I think having community tied in with some of the self-care is really helpful, but for me.
Of course, this transition does not come without its challenges. Becoming aware and mindful about their self-care needs and about advocating for themselves is a challenge many young adults face. This is how Seth, Raechel, and Christian articulated these challenges.
So I think it's important to like note in self-care, it's something that our generation has certainly taken an interest in and put value on, which I think is really cool and exciting. And I think sometimes that can make other folks, like our parents or family members or coworkers or you name it, a little bit uncomfortable or just not even just kind of confused or not sure. It's like that being a value like near the top or something that people are putting in the kind of it takes you have to advocate for yourself. And I think we do see people sometimes weaponize that in a way that's unhealthy. But more often than not, it's often just kind of basic things that sometimes our bosses or employers or our family doesn't understand. And so that's also a part of self-care is like setting those boundaries to create self-care and setting up those boundaries in a way that is not disrespectful or like even selfish, but more just, hey, I need to be this person to my family, to my friends, in my place of work. And so in order to do that, here's the habits that I've kind of catered, or here's the values that I have, and I'm going to stick to those. So sometimes that means by saying yes to that, I'm saying no to something else. And so I think those types of things can be really hard. And doing that with other people, I think, is the way that kind of can be much more impactful.
I think a lot of times in this day and age, we talk about self-care as like self-care, like, you got to just like, go have a margarita by the pool kind of thing, or like go get a facial or a massage. Like that's self-care. But like, I think when we talk about transitions, right, it's a deeper working of self-awareness and understanding who you are and what you need in order to be a healthy individual, right? And oftentimes, like that's what you're saying of like needing to do that with community. That's like the way that you can see yourself in a different perspective from somebody else, right? Like, I think this sense of what does it look like to go through a self-caring transition long term or in a longer extent versus just like one self-care activity. Like self-care activity is to help enrich the self-caring transition, but the self-caring transition is a whole process that you go through of understanding yourself in a deeper way.
Yeah, Raechel and Seth, I feel like there is this narrative sometimes, especially with other generations, that self-care is an indulgence, but it actually feels like a necessary process, like you were saying, Raechel, of like self-discovery and like just setting rhythms of health that hopefully will last for your lifetime, or even knowing how to process and how to create rhythms of health that help you to be a better, like healthier person as a whole throughout your lifetime. So it's not an indulgence, it's like a necessity. And I love and appreciate that our generation is starting to see it and talk about it in that way.
And now for our advice section, here is what Will, Christian, Raechel, and Faith shared as advice for adults and youth workers walking alongside young adults who are going through a self-caring transition.
Yeah, I can kick us off on this one. I think something I found really helpful is when people have created environments for me where I can feel listened to and not told what to do. I think especially with older teenagers and young adults, oftentimes with figures in your life, they can just treat you like you're 12 and they can just tell you what to do and tell you how to take care of yourself and tell you what you need to be doing and tell you, X, Y, Z, all these different things that you need to be doing. But I think advice for leaders in this context would be to create environments where young people can feel listened to and heard and loved and welcome, regardless of the life choices that they make. And I think when you look at how do you specifically help someone make good self-care decisions, I think asking the questions, asking open-ended, kindly toned questions in a way that provoke curiosity or come from a place in curiosity, not in a way to shame or guilt.
And I would also say, like, giving permission that things change over time. Like maybe you're a student athlete. And so for a while, running is like the thing that you do, and you maybe like it works for a while for mental health benefits and physical health benefits and all of these things. But as your life changes and seasons change, sometimes your rhythms need to adjust, and that's okay. And that's a good thing. And it's an opportunity to discover new things about yourself. So while you can maybe grieve the loss and go through the transition, like, can you help paint it as a positive thing for the people, the young people in your life as they navigate this?
I see that emotional awareness and just awareness of yourself is really important for this. And so for leaders, I think it is an importance to kind of bring to attention places of reflection and kind of looking in on yourself and seeing, like, identifying where are places of tension or stress that I'm feeling. How do I respond to things when things are getting hard? Is there a pattern there? Kind of walking with people with empathy and curiosity, like Will said, of just saying, like, an open-ended space of somebody processing. The emotional awareness can then lead to understanding what your needs are in this time and season, whether it's a physical boundary, like whether you need to, go to PT or something like that if you're the athlete, or maybe you need to spend more time kind of practicing, silence and solitude because your inner voice is kind of very loud right now, or kind of going and getting mental health support and different things. I think a youth leader can be able to speak into those things when they give that youth or that student or that person more time to reflect and be more aware of what's going on in their own lives.
Yeah, I think as like leaders or pastors working with young people or students, it's always really important with any group, but especially with young people, is that we're pastoring whole people, not just like their spiritual lives. We're pastoring everything about them. And so being able to like almost have like the buckets of the categories that we check in with, like how is this person doing spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, those types of things. And going beyond just like, hey, asking questions and checking in, but actually helping equip or resource them in order to get the help or the resources that they need in order to like take a step towards health in every area is important. For me, the times that has been most significant is when a leader has come alongside and said like, hey, I've noticed that you're struggling in this particular area and I want to be able to help you. And so what would it look like for us every month to like do this together in order to help you build that rhythm? And so in different seasons, that's been like, hey, I go for a walk with this particular leader every Monday morning because that's like what I need to get outside. Or we, go downtown and have dinner because like I need a little fun in my life, or, whatever it is. But more so than just somebody like telling me like, you need to do this. And somebody inviting me in with them to say, like, let's do this together. And I think it helps remove any shame that could come with a youth leader coming in and saying like, hey, I'm noticing that you're falling behind kind of in these areas. But rather it's an invitation towards relationship, but also an invitation towards a healthy habit and healthy like reflection and learning for the young person themselves.
So I'm back to tell you, if you're really liking the content that you're hearing in this season, we want to hook you up with a really helpful resource. It's a guide titled 7 Things You Need to Know for Successful Young Adult Ministry. This guide covers the transitions that we're talking about in the season, but it also gives you practical questions to help you engage young adults. You can download this guide at youngadultministrynext.com. I mean, you don't have to go right now, but you could. But do come back. Like, make sure you come back after you get it, because you want to hear the next part. Wow, that was just such great insight and advice. I hope you're taking notes, and if you're not, that's okay. You can always come back and listen to this episode again. And now let's go to the wrap-up conversation with Steve. Welcome to the wrap-up conversation on self-caring. Mm-hmm. This is a self-caring transition. Mm-hmm. I think the self-care is a topic that has been more popular in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
But I am very excited that young adults are really taking it on and that it's becoming something that's a priority for them.
I agree.
So apart from what we heard from the young adults in the discussion in this podcast, what else came up in the research?
This came up in our interviews and the conversations that we've all had with young adults, of recognizing the fact that all that's sort of going on. What does it mean for me to take responsibility for my what I eat, how I care for my body, what I put in it, how I exercise, and think about those things. Those turn into disciplines that are really, really important. And the same with mental health. How do I talk about my past, my present, my mental state, and the things that have come my way, which has been really, really important as we look at the research today. I think what surprised me that we heard from our interviews, and I mentioned this just briefly in the introduction for this transition, is the fact that a lot of young adults just have a state of wellness that has been part of their lives since they were children. All different types of conditions, whether it's digestive or diabetes or something with their lives that their parents have helped them cope with or work through. But now, as they are post 18 and legally and otherwise are taking responsibility for their lives, they've really had to think about, well, what does it mean to not only take care of this, but to embrace the fact that this is just a part of my life, and I have to incorporate that into the way I think about how I care for myself and everything else. And I found as I listened to them that there was this sense of ownership, of coming to grips with that's who they are, and it's just a part of their lives, and a bit of lament. Like, I have to carry this, and I have to think about what that means. And it was actually quite beautiful to sort of think about that. So this is more than just being healthy or being well or that type of thing. It's this commitment to oneself to take care of my mental and physical self as I inherit what I've grown up with, and as I think about the fact that I'm getting older and my body's changing as well, right? So,
thinking, and I don't know if in these conversations I might be coming across as like biased towards young adults, which I totally am. I'm coming clean about it.
You go
but with compassion towards adults also.
Totally.
But I think that there might be a tendency for older adults to be in a type of survival mode, or it was just not as important, or it just wasn't as prevalent to acknowledge and recognize or be compassionate with oneself, and to recognize that we need to take care of ourselves in order to keep doing whatever it is that we want to do, however we want to contribute to the world, or like however we want to keep contributing to church spaces or church communities. And so for me, when I hear young adults, and even as a millennial or an older young adult myself, these boundaries that we start putting up around our time or around how we engage with others that might be related to our mental health, or because we're prioritizing time to take care of our physical health, are sometimes misconstrued by adults as we don't want to hang out with you, or that's not as important to me as this is. And, I think at the end of the day, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't keep giving of ourselves. It's like that, saying that we tend to say in Christianity, you can't give from an empty cup.
That's so insightful. And I do think it gets misconstrued, right? Like I've talked with adults, and again, I could be biased toward young adults as well. I think it's because I've been listening to them so much and they've taught me so much. But, the adult with the eye roll of they want to take a personal day, right? It's sort of like me time. Like, and again, that stuff can be abused. But I do think there's something quite beautiful about young adults actually being aware that, like, that's all interconnected, right? Like, I can't just work myself to death and think that somehow I'll deal with my mental health or physical health later, right? So I think that's really important. And I think of two examples in my interactions as a ministry leader and also working with young people. I think in ministry sometimes the impulse is to only talk about task, right? We can get in a meeting or a planning thing, and it's like, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's the schedule. What are we going to do to get this project done? That there's little time to actually say, so how are you? So tell me about something that's spilled into this meeting that you're holding. I think we have to remember and see each other in our totality rather than only in the task, which sometimes can happen out of the impulse to be efficient or that type of thing, right? And there are certain things where there are boundaries where you're not going to share your whole self at a work or whatever. But maybe one of the ministry impulses as we think about young adults thinking about this idea of self-care is to once in a while ask young adults, like, hey, I love what you're doing. I love who you are. Like, are you all right? Tell me, like, what's actually like going on underneath there? What are you excited about? What's sad? What are you thinking about? And I think that gives them permission to not only think that they can only take those things to a counselor, which sometimes they should, but it is a part of who we all are. And I think it just sort of humanizes the way that we engage each other rather than making assumptions that we're all sort of totally healthy and you're just choosing not to be responsible, right?
Yeah, and I think this is one of those places where we can really learn from young adults who are prioritizing that. And, as we become more stable or more busy with life, we might forget to do those self-care practices or have that posture of self-care and compassion. As you said, there's an innate recognition that they need that. And I just think that's beautiful. That there's a lot of grace and acceptance of grace that, when we think about sometimes our faith, we think about the things that we have to do, or of praying, or of going to church and all of those things. And although those are part of our faith and they're great for our contribution and our part in our community, we always do need that grace, which God already gives us.
Absolutely.
That grace and that compassion.
Absolutely.
And and I think that grace and compassion is something that we should always be reminded of. And especially towards ourselves. Because sometimes we're so good at giving it to others. But we're not good at giving it to ourselves.
I would totally agree with that. And I think, especially for young adults and a younger generation, I think that the standard of perfection is so prevalent that to give that grace to oneself is incredibly good news for a generation where to be average is to fail, honestly, right? So I think there's something quite powerful in what you're saying there.
Yeah, so what tips or advice would we give for youth leaders or adults?
Well, I think you've said some good things. I think if any way that we can invite young adults to be gentle with themselves and to speak out of the spaces of grace, I think is really great. I think there's this internal critic a lot of times in all of us, but I think especially with young adults that perhaps we can call out and say, no, there's other voices of grace that can speak to that. I think if you can, before you're quick to judge young adults and their choices, to simply ask the question, are you all right? I think is a compassionate move, and I think it helps them understand that. And then really practically, I think that for this particular transition, self-caring requires a new set of competencies to know how to connect with a doctor or to know how to access a counselor and these type of things. And we shouldn't assume that just because young adults are more open to that they know how to do that. So, I think those simple steps can sometimes be really, really helpful to give them the traction that perhaps that they need or want to continue in living healthy lives.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. We hope this was helpful for you all. We want to keep learning, so Give us your comments, your questions, communicate with each other, have conversations in the YouTube comments. We would love to see that from you.
Totally.
If you liked this conversation or any other conversation that we've had in this season, give us a like, subscribe, follow. Hit the notification button and share. Share with your friends, share with young adults in your life. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks.
This podcast is one of the many free resources produced by the Fuller Youth Institute. Check out the show notes for links to all of the resources mentioned in today's episode. And if you want to not just listen, but also watch this podcast, you can go find us on the Fuller Youth Institute YouTube channel. Thanks so much for listening or watching.